Well, I guess, you're getting to that age of 30s and 40s, you talk a lot about family, and if you have fallen foul of a lot of these bad habits and mistakes, can cause a lot of relationship strain, and we know that money being one of the biggest problems can cause meltdown of a relationship.
100%. The best way to kill a relationship is to fight about money. It's what most couples argue about when they're in a relationship that it's not going well, and then the blame game starts, and you shouldn't have done this, and you did that, and that's very, very difficult to recover, which ultimately then unfortunately can lead on to the biggest financial catastrophe for you, which is a divorce. And especially when kids are involved, and that's a sort of control-alt-delete, maybe in your 30s or 40s, where you might find yourself financially having to start again. And again, it comes down to if you've taken the right steps and you've made your decision-making for the right reason, you shouldn't find yourself in that type of relationship that's arguing about money. You should be able to fatten the goose up and prepare yourself for those leaner times when one or other partner isn't working and you've a family to support. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show. This week we are looking at some of the biggest mistakes that you can make in your 30s and 40s when it comes to finance. Some great life lessons in here, and irrespective of your age or generation that you might be in, you're going to learn some pretty cool skills to get you on track for a life of financial stability. As always, make sure you take plenty of notes, but most importantly, make sure you take plenty of action. Hey guys, welcome to this week's Money and Investing Show with me, your host, Andrew Baxter, and as always, my offsider and co-host, Mitch Olarenshaw.
Good to be here, Mr. B. Now, fun episode, although dangerous. What we're going to be talking about today are the biggest common financial mistakes to make in your 30s and 40s. Listeners out there, if you're in that age bracket and you know you've made some mistakes, we're probably going to bring them up now, but importantly, we're going to talk about solutions.
Absolutely. I think you can't live a life without making mistakes. Otherwise, you've done nothing, as long as you learn from them, which I guess is the key thing. And look, this can cover a multitude of sins, because I guess this is the square up between lifestyle and fun and commitment to a financially healthy future. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can have all of that, but you've got to follow a process and plan in order to get there. First thing people will say, well, how do you have lifestyle and fun and still invest? Because you're going to spend all your money on lifestyle and fun. And the key thing there is to, I guess, not go on an overspending spree, have some budgeting in play and so on.
And I think a good precautionary tale too for our younger listeners like myself in my 20s, this is great information. We learn from the mistakes of others, thankfully. So let's get stuck into it. What are the biggest pitfalls to make in that age bracket?
Well, look, I think that age bracket is a defining moment in life, because depending on your choices, you may find yourself married, or maybe you find yourself in the world of singledom and bachelorhood or whatever. And I think the way you live your life is quite different between the two. So if you've already dropped anchor and you're married and you're starting to have a family, then the way you probably can conduct yourself through those periods of time is going to be quite different, where there's going to be an awful lot more emphasis on family and providing support and so on. And probably the biggest mistake, if you're in that particular camp, and maybe we'll deal with that camp first and then look down the other side of the ledger, is that planning. So let's say you've gotten married and you've decided to have a family, you've brought your family home, and then all of a sudden one party or the other is taking time off to be the at-home parent, and that can obviously have quite a substantial impact on income, and that's a massive thing, especially when you look at people that are very geared to buy a home and debt serviceability. So that's a massive area.
So I guess that kind of comes down to planning, right? That if you are in that stage of life of kids and one person not working, having the emergency fund built up, not too much debt going on, and a house that you can comfortably afford makes a lot of sense.
That's exactly right. And it's that lay up too. You don't go, oh, gee, we're married and now we've got two kids and one of us isn't working, or we've got no money. There's a series of decisions that lay it up to get you into that position. And it comes down to that age-old guide of planning things out. And it's not, oh, next month we're going to have a baby, or we're going to try and have a baby, or whatever it might be. It's a question of really thinking forward to say, look, if we are going to have a family and one of our incomes is going to be tempered or even turned off for a period of time, what can we actually afford to borrow on one income in order to be able to maintain a quality of life? And that may well be a different type of house or in a different suburb, but it's the harsh reality to ensure that you're not under financial duress, because probably one of the most toxic ingredients to put into a relationship is money stress.
Totally, yeah. And we know that it can cause a lot of stress and therefore a lot of pain as well. What about overspending? Because I think as you approach your 40s, you're kind of getting to your peak income generation of your lifetime. You have that lifestyle inflation, you're earning more than potentially you've ever earned before. Very easy to go and spend it.
Very much so. And particularly so if you've not gone down the traditional route of being married and having a family. So let's say you're a lone wolf and you're enjoying singledom. There's the...
Speaking from experience.
30 to 40 was, I was 41 when I got married.
Okay.
And so my 30s was a period of, very extensive hedonism. My business was going phenomenally well. My income was insane. And so too was my personal life to match it, because I wasn't in a committed relationship and I enjoyed that decade wholesomely. The flip side of that is that you don't have anyone to be accountable to, and particularly in my instance where I was a CEO of a business, so there's no one to answer to, just yourself. And so the way you make decisions when you don't have to be accountable can be quite selfish, quite hedonistic, and do come with consequences. And I think that's why having a mentor is so important. So there's a level of accountability irrespective of where you are in the journey, to say, hey, are you really making that decision for the right reason? And I remember having this conversation with my father. I had one of the many forays I've had into exotic cars. And I remember my dad was in the passenger seat and we're ripping around somewhere, and he said, I've got to ask you a question. It's a beautiful car, by the way. He's in the car industry and really appreciated it. And he said, but can I ask you, why did you buy this car? Was it, and I was about to answer, he said, hang on. He said, was it for you or was it for the way that people treat you? Interesting question from the old chap. And he go, yeah, that's actually...
Quite wise. And
quite
true.
A wise question. I said, well, probably a bit of both. I wanted it. It was a goal. And he said, great. And, you're kicking goals. You deserve that. On the other side of the coin, what else could you have done with the excess amount you spent for that, which was probably buy a couple of properties? I had properties anyway, but it was like you could have done a couple more properties. And he said, and that's the trade-off. And he said, and when you get older, how will you view this decision? It's like, ooh, that's a good one.
That's a really deep conversation to have.
And my father's not necessarily the deepest person. He's certainly not an educated man, but he's a really wise person and he's lived an awful lot of life. And I'm talking about that now, and that was, goodness me, 15, 18 years ago, that conversation, and it still sticks with me now. And you think, well, yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that. I've still got some great memories of some of the experiences I had in that particular car. But at the same time, there is a trade-off. And I was very fortunate. I've been a minority of people that are in a position to kind of do that and still invest. But so that overspend or compensation of spending or hedonism without accountability is really toxic, and that's a very, very difficult roundabout to get off. And talking of advice from people, when you have a circle of advisors, whether that's your family, parents, or whatever, or professional advisors, I remember my accountant as well around the same time said, Andrew, you need to be very careful, because just be careful you don't enjoy your own company too much, because you might get just stuck with that. In other words, if you get on that treadmill where it's just you, you're not really going to leave any space for anybody else to come into your life. You become quite selfish. He said, do what you got to do, enjoy the hedonism, but at some point, don't become selfish with what you're doing. Now, that's not necessarily money advice, it's life advice, but it does bleed across to quite a lot of things. And I'm not talking to you about this. You're young enough to...
I'm listening. Don't worry. I'm intently listening.
This is the relative experience. So I think, that spending, when you've got no one to be accountable to, is an example of that. Decision making, when you don't necessarily put a lot of focus on the future and you're enjoying the here and now because you don't want to be accountable to, can be quite different. At the same time, if you're more evolved, I think is the term, in your goal setting and planning, that decade of earning great money, you can also be put into good use. And I was doing development, and I was a development financer for somebody else, and I had lots of investments going on, my business and so on and so forth. So it wasn't at the expense of that, but if I was on a more limited income, it most certainly would have been at the expense of all of that. And right now I'd be looking back going, gee, what a wasted decade.
Got you.
And you can't turn the clock back. So accountability, having people around you that are going to call you on it and hold you in check, I think is something that's a big mistake that people make. They don't have somebody, and your friends aren't necessarily going to be the ones to do that because they're probably on the same merry-go-round as you.
Indeed. Which brings me to my next idea. Probably habits is what springs to mind for me. Now, we all can develop bad habits. If you've partied through your 20s and haven't grown up by your 30s and 40s, that can kind of have a long-lasting effect.
Well, the longer those habits go on, the harder they are to break. And I look back at that particular chapter of my life, and one of the guys I used to knock about with is still on that treadmill. So it can be hard to get off of that.
And we're talking about things like alcohol, drugs, gambling, partying, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, pure hedonism. I mean, for me, I love travel and whatnot, and I live a fairly healthy life. So it's never drugs particularly or party or any of that sort of stuff, but just sort of, just being on a path where you go, yeah, let's do that. Let's just be really spontaneous. You're going skiing? I'll go skiing with you. So you're just being, I'll go again. I like it. And that's okay if you've got the means to do it. But there is a massive opportunity cost. And what I guess we're talking about there is more peer pressure actually to sort of squirt you down a particular pathway. The other thing which I think is a monumental mistake in that chapter of your life is that you don't already have a plan B.
Oh, yeah.
Second form, third form, fourth form of income, whatever it might be. Because again, if you've got that income coming in, learning how to steward that and push it in the right place that's going to create a longer term asset. And I mentioned, I had several properties. I was doing development finance for someone where I was the equity partner. I'd front up the cash and they'd do the work, the building work, and then you get a split of the profit. And that was a really nice passive model for me. I still do that sort of stuff to an extent now, less so because my risk appetite has changed as I've gotten older. And also I've learned the skills to do the development side myself too. So why would I need the other side? I can put my money into something I've got control over. And I think your attitude to risk certainly changes. I had a couple of bad experiences in that space. I had a couple of developments that went south and I was out money. So you learn. And so the risk profile of that then suited me. I'm able to be accountable, that relied on me from a family perspective. But would that suit me now? Probably not. So there's an example of how things can change depending on your circumstance.
Which brings me to the next idea, I guess, in this is another mistake that you could likely make in your 30s and 40s is chasing what you haven't already got.
100%.
So let's say, for example, you haven't done the work to get to a certain point in that 30s and 40s that you start taking on way too much risk. And I guess I've seen this with clients that come to us for help that are in that situation.
Exactly right, Mitch. I think, and we talk about this a lot in the book, that there are chapters to do things. I mentioned previously, you've got to have that plan B. Second thing, you need to have had that up and running and going so that when you're in your 30s and 40s, it's working for you. And the income that spins out is what you then use for your investing, for example. If you haven't taken that step, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't buy time back. And you haven't taken the time to learn the skills. As you've gotten older, you're probably more set in your ways. You're less likely to want to change. You certainly don't want to listen to somebody else. And all of a sudden, that notion of someone saying, hey, you could and should be doing this. Yeah, I've already got it. But you kind of haven't. That humbleness is kind of gone a little bit. And I think, you do chase it. And you realize that maybe you haven't been putting money as you should into your super, or you haven't been buying property in the way that you should, or paying a mortgage down, or keeping your debt under control, or providing for, at some point in time, if you get married and have kids, to have a glide path there. We've got some backup money to buy a family home and also support your partner when they're not working, all those different things. And so to get back on track, what seems like a good idea at the time what could possibly go wrong when something it was a good idea at the time.
Of course it is,
is you start to embrace things that are quite high risk that you maybe don't fully understand, but your goal to get back on track is so strong that you kind of blinker yourself off to the risks of what you're doing. You try and shortcut it rather than take the time to let time do its thing. And that's a big mistake. So you see people going into a whole raft of risky investments that promise big upside, but when they go wrong, just leave you further and further behind. And the reason I think people select those investments is their motivation for those kinds of investments are less objective. They're chasing it, as you put it.
Indeed. Well, look, let's take this a step further and talk about the impacts of these of these mistakes, I should say, because with all of this, the short-term effects are probably fairly minimal. You won't notice much, but over time, 10, 20 years down the track, it can create a catastrophic problem. So what are the impacts of the things we've just mentioned?
Look, unexpected loss of capital is probably one, and I had that with the development. I really got torched on one in particular, and that hurt, but not that much because I was in a position I could recover that with other things I was doing. If I wound that clock forward and I was in a household that had a mortgage, a partner that wasn't working and 2 kids to support, that would be catastrophic.
Tough, yeah.
And so it's a question of getting the syntax right. That risky stuff when you're younger gives you the ability to smooth over the choppy waters, to wallpaper over the cracks, as it were, and recover and bounce back. So there's an example where you're playing the wrong game at the wrong time. And I think, that's monumental. So that's a big risk down the track. Lack of structuring is another one, which is why we bang on about it so much at the early days. Get your structuring right now, because down the line, as you become more sophisticated, assuming you grow with your knowledge base, you might have several properties, for example, which is great. But if they're not structured in the correct way, they could be exposed to risk. They could be not as tax effective for you as you would like, and a whole raft of other challenges. And to then restructure your affairs down the line involves stamp duty, which is cost prohibitive on a property transaction, just simply to get it in the right seat on the bus. So it's about taking the time to, as we said right at the start, to plan out where you really want to be. And they're two examples of risk. I'm sure there are more. What else have you got for me?
Well, I guess, you're getting to that age of 30s and 40s, you talk a lot about family. And if you have fallen foul of a lot of these bad habits and mistakes, can cause a lot of relationship strain. And we know that money being one of the biggest problems can cause meltdown of a relationship.
100%. The best way to kill a relationship is to fight about money. It's what most couples argue about when they're in a relationship that it's not going well. And then the blame game starts, and, you shouldn't have done this and you did that. And that's very, very difficult to recover, which ultimately then, unfortunately, can lead on to the biggest financial catastrophe for you, which is a divorce. And especially when kids are involved, and that's a sort of control-alt-delete, maybe in your 30s or 40s, where you might find yourself financially having to start again. And again, it comes down to, if you've taken the right steps and you've made your decision-making for the right reason, you shouldn't find yourself in that type of relationship that's arguing about money. You should be able to fatten the goose up and prepare yourself for those leaner times when one or other partner isn't working and you have a family to support.
I guess ultimately with all of this too, making these mistakes, you're going to have less money by default of the mistakes we've said. So if you've got less money, whether it be for yourself or for your family, you may not be able to retire as early as what you thought, or have a comfortable retirement either, right?
Exactly right. And the earlier you start, the earlier your money's working for you. It's as simple as that. And you might go, well, I'm going through a lean time, I've got family to support, but you've also got a massive chunk of equity that you've built up in your house if you've owned your house for 10 or 15 years. Whereas if you just bought the house yesterday to put your new family in, it becomes a lot more challenging, and that asset base isn't there. And as you say, your contributions to super might be a little skinnier, and the choices around that then kick on to a retirement that may be a little less financially robust than you'd hope for too. So, it comes back to, the earlier you get started with this, the better. The stronger the plan that you have to get started, the better. The clearer you are with what your objectives actually are, and they can evolve over time, and they will change massively, and they should change over time, the better chance you've got of hitting the target. And then if you've taken those steps in the right order, you've got your timing right, you've got clarity of what you want, and you understand that those objectives are going to change, you're not going to find yourself running foul of trying to put a square peg in a round hole where you're taking really risky stuff when you shouldn't do it. You don't find yourself arriving at the game late and having to chase it and take on crazy risk in what you're doing. And there's a match of where you should be versus where you actually are. Now, the challenge is most people do leave it late, because there are other things that blow them off course, called life and fun. Most people don't have a plan. They just kind of, okay, we'll work it out as we go along. And most people can be quite firm on, this is my goal. I want to be a millionaire. I want to be able to retire. But they don't have that fluidness in the objectives that they really have. And so you've got someone that's really rigid, that's arrived at the game late, that's chasing it. Doesn't end well. So you've got to backpedal and say, look, where you are isn't based on age, it's what square you are on the board. So if you find yourself at age 32 and you've never invested and you don't have a plan B income coming in, you've got to go right back to square one, get your debt down, get your emergency fund built up, develop a savings habit, start saving for a deposit on a property, start looking at the broader realm of investing, start educating yourself on what you want. You can't just jump in, I'm 32, so therefore I should be. It doesn't work that way. You've got to lay the foundations out. And yes, you can fast track that. We don't have a shortcut, because shortcuts are where you cut corners and end up in big trouble and the wheels come off. But fast tracking is where you cut out all of the unnecessary stuff and focus on the immediacy of what you need to do. And you see this often. You get someone comes in, I'm 34, I've had a great time, I've been traveling, I've got all these worldly experiences, I haven't really got a career, I've left uni and I've sort of potted around, haven't really found my groove in life yet. what do I do? And you can sit down and do a financial health check with them and go, okay, this is where we're at. We've got to get this debt sorted out. You've got credit card debt. Let's get that refinanced with a personal loan at a lower rate so you can get it paid off. Let's start budgeting so you've got some spare cash to pay that debt down. What do you actually want? You kind of lived your life in reverse. You've done all the fun stuff, or at least what you thought was the fun stuff now, and now you're paying for it. But what do you actually want now? It's like, I don't want the money stress, or I want some stability. I want to meet someone and have a home and bring my kids up, and I can't afford to do it. Then you can build a plan because they've given you some goals. But, you've got to take it in a very meticulous and step-by-step way if you want to get people to where they want to be. And it doesn't matter here's the key thing. It doesn't matter if you've made a couple of mistakes along the way called life. Because if you haven't made a mistake, you haven't lived. You have to make mistakes. It's the only way you get good at making decisions. And it's very rarely that those mistakes are irreversible. It's just a question of a different form of remedial action to get back on track where you feel that you should be. So this isn't a beat up going, oh, you've lived your life the wrong way around. You should have done this. You could have done that. The fact that you're listening to this and maybe you're in a state of mind now where, okay, now maybe it's my time that I need to get my money side sorted out. What do I need to do? Well, there's a really clear game plan. And guess what? You got heaps of good war stories along the way too. So there's no judgment there. If you've traveled and had a hedonistic life and you've had some color in it, fantastic. That's all good stuff to do. But at some point, if you want the stability that comes with having your finances provisioned for properly, you do have to take it back a couple of steps and not play the game as a 30-something-year-old, but play the game as a late teenager and early 20s and start bedding down those skills. And the sooner you get onto that, the sooner you end up back on track and you can have the war stories and the financial stability. But it takes a bit of humility to do that.
Indeed. Sounds tough, but very doable, as you mentioned.
What's more important?
That's right.
Having a little bit of okay, I'm not where I should be in life, and maybe my ego is a little bit rubbed up because, I should be here, but I'm not. Or just trying to bury your head in the sand and getting to 60 going, actually, I've got nothing. I've got no home to live in. I've got no savings, no investment. I've got all this debt. 60 is a tough one to correct.
Oh,
but
yeah.
30s and 40s, dead easy to get it back on track. But you need a mentor. You need someone to be accountable to say, hey, it's okay. We can get you back on track, but we're going to hold you accountable. If you're serious about wanting to get back on track, these are the steps to take, and we'll help make sure you take them.
So strategies as we cap off here to avoid these: having a mentor, number one. Secondly, having a plan and getting some good advice, even just seeing a financial advisor.
100%. Make sure it's the right kind of financial advisor too. Not someone that's just going to whack you in a managed fund, but someone that's going to school you along the way as to these are the things you probably want to learn a little bit more about this. I can tell you about it, but you want to learn so you understand how to play the rules, how to understand the rules of the game you're trying to play. And you can get back on track. It's not an impossible. There's nothing worse than sitting down with someone and they don't see any future of optimism. They're just like, I'm done. I made all the wrong choices. It doesn't matter if you've made whatever choices you have that brought you to this point. It's easy to fix, but you've got to be committed to that. So you need a plan. You've got to have a goal or objective on the end of it. And then I think you've got to have the humility to say, okay, I'll suck it up. I'll take advice if you give it to me and I'll follow it through to get back on track.
Totally. Now, before we wrap up, AB, one thing I'd really love from our listeners here is some engagement. Let's hear it in the comments section. Worst mistake that you've made in your 30s and 40s or that you've seen someone else make. There's no ego here. Let's get it out on the table. Let's hear it.
Yeah, let us know what size T-shirt. If you've made a mistake, we've got a wardrobe of T-shirts. We've got them all.
Totally.
And that's life, Mitch. Life is about, you get one crack at it and you're going to make a lot of mistakes on the way through and you can't beat yourself up from it, but you need to learn from them too if you want to get somewhere. And our goal is to help people get to a level where they've got peace of mind and stability, if that's what they're after, so they can have it. If you want to have a hedonistic life and travel around the world, well, we'll help you create investments that can facilitate that in just the same way.
Sure.
And make yourself redundant and have your income working for you where you're off doing what you want to do. There's no issue with any of those things, but you just need a plan to get there.
Indeed. Well, unashamed plugged. Anyone in that situation, reach out to the team. We'll be here to help.
100%.
Thanks very much, AB.
My pleasure, anytime. There you have it, guys. Make sure you give us a review and a rating and share this podcast with your friends or family. It helps more people get the show.